Mara sat by the window long after Tina had left. The night outside was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The same streetlights glowed, the same distant sounds of traffic passed by, but something inside her had permanently shifted. It was not just heartbreak. It was clarity. And clarity, she realized, can be more painful than betrayal. For the first time in days, Mara stood up and walked slowly to the mirror hanging on her wall. She looked at her reflection, not to fix her hair or wipe her face, but to truly see herself. Her eyes were tired, yes, but they were no longer searching. They were no longer waiting. And that was new. She gently touched her own cheek, as if reassuring herself that she was still there. Still whole, still standing. He didn't take everything, she whispered softly. And for the first time since Kenny disappeared, she felt something unexpected rise inside her. Not anger, not sadness, but strength. The next morning, Mara woke up earlier than usual. There was no message on her phone. No missed calls. No sudden explanation. No miracle apology. And somehow that silence no longer felt unbearable. It felt final. She walked into the kitchen, made herself a cup of tea, and sat quietly. The house felt different now. Not empty, but honest. There were no illusions left in the room. Only truth. Tina called her later that day. "Hey, how are you feeling today?" Tina asked gently. There was a pause. Mara looked out the window again, watching people move on with their lives. I'm finally seeing things clearly," she replied. Tina didn't interrupt. Mara continued. "It hurts. But it's a clean kind of pain now. Not confusing. Not heavy. Just real." Tina exhaled softly. "That means you're healing." Mara gave a faint smile. "I think I am." Days turned into a week. And slowly, life began to move again. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. But steadily. Mara started going back to her routine. She reopened her work files, responded to emails she had ignored, and even began planning new ideas for her fashion business. The same dream Kenny had once pretended to support. But this time it was different. This time it was hers alone. No shared plans. No borrowed promises. No illusions. Just her vision. And her strength. One afternoon, while organizing her documents, Mara found something unexpected. A small handwritten note Kenny had once given her. It read, "Trust me. I won't hurt you again." She stared at it for a long moment. Before, those words would have broken her all over again. But now, she simply folded the note, walked to the trash bin, and let it go. Not with anger. Not with tears. But with understanding. "Words are easy," she said quietly. "Actions are truth." As the weeks passed, Mara began to rediscover parts of herself she had forgotten. She started reading again. Books she had once loved but abandoned during emotional chaos. She began taking evening walks, noticing small details she had ignored before. The color of the sky, the laughter of children, the calm rhythm of life continuing. She even started journaling. At first, the pages were filled with pain. Questions like, why did he come back? Why did I believe him? Was I not enough? But gradually the questions changed. They became, what did I learn? What do I deserve? What will I never ignore again? And those questions began to build something new inside her. Self-respect. One evening, Tina visited again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Mara opened the door with a small, genuine smile. "You look lighter," Tina said, observing her carefully. "I feel lighter," Mara replied. They sat together talking over tea. After a while, Tina asked the question she had been holding back. "If he came back again, what would you do?" Mara didn't answer immediately. She thought about it, not emotionally but honestly. Then she said something that surprised even herself. "I wouldn't open the door." Tina nodded slowly. "Not because I hate him," Mara continued, "but because I finally love myself enough not to let him in again." And in that moment, the silence between them felt peaceful, not heavy. Months passed. Mara's business began to grow. She worked hard, stayed focused, and made decisions with a clarity she had never had before. People started noticing her dedication. Opportunities slowly began to come her way. But more importantly, she trusted herself again. That was her biggest victory. One day, while attending a small business event, someone asked her a simple question. What inspired you to start this journey? Mara paused. She could have given a professional answer. She could have talked about ambition, dreams, or passion. But instead she said something real. Pain, she replied softly. And what it taught me. The person looked surprised. Mara smiled gently. Sometimes life breaks you just enough to show you what truly matters. That night, as she returned home, Mara stood once again in front of her mirror. But this time, the reflection looking back at her was different. Stronger, calmer, wiser. She no longer saw a woman who had been fooled. She saw a woman who had learned. And that made all the difference. Somewhere in the quiet of her heart, she finally accepted a truth that had once been too painful to face. Kenny was never her loss. He was her lesson. And lessons, no matter how painful, are never meant to destroy us. They are meant to shape us. Before going to bed, Mara wrote one final line in her journal that night. I was not wrong for loving him. I was only wrong for forgetting to love myself in the process. She closed the journal, turned off the light, and lay down. For the first time in a long time, her mind was quiet. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was clear. And sometimes, clarity is the most peaceful ending of all. Ending message, same tone and motto. Life does not always break us to end us. Sometimes it breaks us to rebuild us stronger than before. Mara's story is not just about betrayal. It is about awakening. It is about the moment you stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start saying, what is this teaching me? Because not every person who walks into your life is meant to stay. Some come to love you. Some come to test you. And some come to teach you the most important lesson of all. How to finally choose yourself. And when you learn that, you don't just move on. You rise. Mara did not realize the exact moment her healing became strength. It did not happen in one dramatic day. There was no sudden transformation, no grand realization that changed everything overnight. Instead, it came quietly, in small, almost invisible shifts. In the way she stopped checking her phone every few minutes. In the way she no longer replayed old conversations in her mind. In the way Kenny's name slowly became just a memory, not a wound. One afternoon, as sunlight gently filled her room, Mara sat at her desk working on a new design collection. Her sketches were spread out in front of her. Bold, confident, expressive. Different from anything she had created before. These designs were not made to impress someone. They were not made to be approved. They were made to reflect her. And maybe, without realizing it, that was the biggest change of all. As her business began to grow, Mara started interacting with new people. Clients, collaborators, and other entrepreneurs. Among them was a woman named Sarah. Sarah was sharp, focused, and carried a quiet confidence that Mara immediately respected. They met during a small meeting about a potential partnership. At first, their conversations were strictly professional. But over time, something deeper formed: understanding. One evening, after a long discussion about work, Sarah asked casually, "You've built all this on your own?" Mara paused for a moment. Then she smiled slightly. "Not exactly. Life helped." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a story." Mara looked out the window, her expression calm. "It is," she said. "But it's not a sad one anymore." As weeks passed, Mara found herself opening up. Not completely, not all at once, but slowly. She shared parts of her past. Not with pain, but with acceptance. And in doing so, she realized something powerful. Her story no longer controlled her. She controlled how it lived inside her. One day, while organizing old files on her laptop, Mara came across a folder she had not opened in months. It was labeled simply, plans. Her heart skipped slightly. She knew what was inside. The business ideas she had once created with Kenny. The dreams they had once spoken about. The future they had once imagined. Together. For a moment, her hand hovered over the mouse. Old feelings tried to rise. But they didn't take over. Not this time. She opened the folder. One by one, she looked through the files. Some ideas were good. Some were unfinished. Some were built on promises that were never real. She sat there quietly, absorbing it all. Then she did something unexpected. She didn't delete the folder. She renamed it. Lessons. Because that's what it truly was. That night, Mara sat with Tina again. The two friends had returned to their usual routine. Tea, conversation, and honesty. "You've changed," Tina said, studying her carefully. Mara smiled. "I had to." Tina nodded slowly. "Do you ever think about him?" Mara didn't pretend. "Yes," she said. "But not the way I used to." "How so?" Mara took a deep breath. "I don't miss him anymore. I just remember what he taught me." Tina leaned back, thoughtful. "And what did he teach you?" Mara's answer came without hesitation. "That love without respect is not love." Time continued to move. And with it so did Mara. Her work gained attention. Her confidence grew stronger. She began to trust her instincts again, not blindly, but wisely. And that made all the difference. One evening, as she was closing her shop, a familiar feeling passed through her. Not fear. Not sadness. Just awareness. She turned slightly. For a brief moment, she thought she saw someone across the street. A figure that looked familiar. Her heart paused. But then, just as quickly, she looked away. Because something inside her had changed. She no longer needed to confirm. She no longer needed answers. She no longer needed him. Mara walked home that evening with a calm she had never known before. Not because life had become perfect, but because she had become stronger. Later that night, she sat down to write again. Her journal had become more than just pages. It had become a space where she met herself honestly. She picked up her pen and wrote, "There was a time I thought losing him would break me." She paused, thinking. Then continued. "But now I understand. Losing him saved me." The truth is, Mara's story was never really about Kenny. It was about her. Her heart. Her strength. Her ability to love. And her ability to rise after being hurt. Because in life, not every ending is a loss. Some endings are protection. Some are redirection. And some are quiet blessings in disguise. Months later, Mara stood in front of a small audience. She had been invited to speak about her journey. Her business, her growth, her experiences. People listened carefully as she spoke. Not because she was perfect, but because she was real. At the end of her talk, someone asked her, "What would you say to someone who is struggling to let go of a person who hurt them?" Mara looked at the audience. For a moment, she saw her past self in that question. Then she answered gently but firmly. "Letting go is not about forgetting them. It's about remembering yourself." The room fell silent. Because sometimes the simplest truths are the most powerful. That night, as Mara returned home, she once again stood in front of her mirror. But this time, there was no pain behind her eyes. No confusion. No doubt. Only clarity. Only peace. She smiled softly at her reflection. And whispered something she had never said before. "I am enough." And she meant it. Ending message. Same tone and motto. Some people come into our lives not to stay, but to awaken us. They show us what love is not so we can finally understand what love should be. Mara's story is not about betrayal anymore. It is about transformation. Because the real power is not in holding on to someone who keeps hurting you. The real power is in finding the strength to walk away and never look back. Remember this. Kindness is not weakness. Love is not foolish. But self-respect must always come first. Because the moment you start choosing yourself is the moment your life truly begins. Mara no longer counted the days since Kenny disappeared. Not because she had forgotten, but because it no longer mattered. Time, she had learned, does not always heal by itself. It heals when you decide to stop reopening the wound. And Mara had finally made that decision. It was a quiet morning when something unexpected happened. Mara was sitting in her workspace, reviewing fabric samples for her next collection. The sunlight fell gently across the table, lighting up the colors she had chosen. Soft beige, deep maroon, and a shade of blue that reminded her of calm skies after a storm. Her phone buzzed. At first, she ignored it. She had trained herself not to react instantly anymore. But the phone buzzed again. And again. With a slight frown, she reached for it. An unknown number. For a brief second, her heart paused, not with hope, but with recognition of what that feeling used to be. She answered calmly. "Hello." There was silence. Then a voice. A voice she had not heard in months. Mara. Everything inside her stilled. Not shattered. Not shaken. Just still. Kenny. In the past, this moment would have broken her completely. Her emotions would have rushed in all at once. Questions, pain, hope, anger. But now something was different. She didn't speak immediately. She simply listened. "I know you might not want to hear from me," Kenny continued, his voice uncertain. "But I needed to talk to you." Mara stood up slowly, walking toward the window. The world outside looked the same. But she wasn't the same person anymore. "What do you want, Kenny?" she asked, her voice steady. There was a pause. I made mistakes," he said. "I know I hurt you. But things went wrong for me too. I lost everything. I didn't mean for it to happen like that." Mara closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not because his words hurt, but because she had heard this pattern before. Different words. Same meaning. "I'm sorry," he added softly. There it was. The word that once held so much power over her. The word that once made her believe in second chances. The word that once reopened doors she should have kept closed. But now, it felt empty. Mara took a deep breath. "Kenny," she said calmly, "do you know what the hardest part was?" He didn't answer. "It wasn't that you left," she continued. "It wasn't even the lies." Her voice remained steady, but firm. "It was realizing that I trusted someone who only came back when they needed something." Silence filled the line. "I didn't use you," Kenny said quickly, almost defensively. But Mara didn't react. She had learned something important. Truth does not need to argue. "You disappeared without a word," she said. "No explanation. No honesty. Nothing. I had problems. And I had a heart," she interrupted gently. Not angrily. Not loudly. But clearly. There was a long pause. For the first time, Kenny had no immediate response. Because sometimes, when faced with truth, excuses lose their strength. I thought maybe we could talk," he said eventually. "Maybe fix things." Mara looked at her reflection in the window. And for a brief moment she saw her past self. The version of her who would have said yes. The version of her who would have believed. The version of her who would have tried again. But that version of her no longer existed. "Some things are not meant to be fixed," she said softly. Kenny's voice dropped. "So that's it." Mara didn't hesitate this time. "Yes," she said. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. But with finality. "You're not even going to give me a chance?" he asked. And there it was again. The expectation. The assumption that she would still be the same. Mara smiled faintly. "I already did," she replied. Silence. Heavy. Real. Undeniable. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for," she added. And she meant it. Not because he deserved her kindness, but because she refused to carry hate in her heart. Before he could say anything else, Mara ended the call. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just calmly. She placed her phone down on the table. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. And for the first time in this entire journey, she felt something she had been moving toward all along. Closure. Not the kind that comes from explanations, but the kind that comes from within. Later that evening, Tina came over again. Mara told her everything. Every word. Every moment. Tina listened carefully, her expression serious. "And how do you feel now?" she asked. Mara thought for a moment. Then she said something simple. "Free." Tina smiled. "Then you made the right choice." Mara nodded. "I didn't even feel angry," she admitted. "I just understood." "That's growth," Tina said. That night, Mara returned to her journal. But this time, her words were different. There was no confusion, no pain, no questions, only clarity. She wrote, "Today the past knocked on my door again." She paused, then continued, "But this time I didn't open it." Days turned into weeks, and life continued to move forward. But now there was no weight holding her back, no unfinished emotions, no lingering doubts. Mara expanded her business further. She took risks she would have once been afraid of. She trusted her decisions. She believed in herself, not because everything had gone right, but because she had survived when things went wrong. One afternoon, during a meeting with a new client, the conversation shifted unexpectedly. "You seem very strong," the client said. "Have you always been this confident?" Mara smiled. "No," she replied honestly. "I learned it." "From success?" the client asked. Mara shook her head gently. "From mistakes." Because that was the truth. Her strength was not built in comfort. It was built in pain, in lessons, in moments where she had to choose between holding on and letting go. And she had finally chosen herself. Months later, Mara stood once again in front of her mirror. The same mirror, the same reflection, but a completely different person. She no longer saw someone who had been hurt. She saw someone who had healed. She saw someone who had grown. She saw someone who had learned the most important lesson of all. Not everyone who comes back deserves a place in your life. She smiled softly, not because life had become perfect, but because she had become stronger. And in that quiet moment she whispered, "Thank you." Not to Kenny, not to the past, but to herself, for choosing strength when it would have been easier to choose comfort. Ending message, same tone and motto. Sometimes life gives us a second chance, not with the same person, but with ourselves. Mara's story is not about heartbreak anymore. It is about power. The power to walk away. The power to say no. The power to choose peace over temporary emotions. Because the truth is, not every apology deserves forgiveness. Not every return deserves acceptance. And not every person deserves access to the version of you they once broke. Remember this. Growth is not when you stop feeling pain. Growth is when you stop allowing the same pain to repeat. And sometimes the strongest thing you will ever do is close a door and never open it again.